Every opportunity that I give those stewards, Lewis Hamilton said over the radio in Budapest, every single time they give me a penalty. Nobody answered him. But 3 days later, somebody did answer the other question, the one nobody actually asked out loud. Why didn't Ferrari just tell Charles Leclerc to slow down? 1/10 of a kilometer per hour. That's the entire case against Lewis Hamilton in the Hungarian pit lane. 80.1 against a limit of 80. A number so small it barely deserves the word speeding, and yet it dropped him from 4th to 5th, behind his own teammate, in a title fight where 50 points already separate him from the championship lead. Ferrari could have closed that gap in about 4 seconds. All it would have taken was one radio call telling Leclerc to lift, hand the position back, and let the team's actual title contender keep the spot the penalty had just taken from him. That call never came. And when a reporter finally asked why, Fred Vasseur gave an answer that sounded almost reasonable in isolation. He said it would have been unfair to ask Leclerc to give up a position he'd earned fair and square, just to cushion a penalty that wasn't his fault. Subscribe right now if you want the version of this story the press releases leave out, and tell me in the comments which country you're watching from, because paddocks read this decision very differently depending on where you sit. Here's the part that makes that word unfair worth sitting with for a second. This is not the first time a Ferrari driver has been asked to give up a position for the other one this year. It happened in Baku, months earlier, in a very different direction. Picture the scene without the names attached first. A driver is running ahead of his teammate on a slower tire strategy. The team decides the position should go to the other car. The order is given. The driver hesitates, holds the position for a lap or two longer than the team wanted, then eventually lets his teammate through. Nothing dramatic, no contact. Just a delay in following an instruction. Afterward, the team principal is asked about it, and he doesn't call it a racing incident, and he doesn't call it fair game. He calls it a misjudgment. On the record, no hedging. Now put the name back in. That driver was Lewis Hamilton. That team principal was Fred Vasseur. And the reason it stings is not that the verdict was harsh. It's that in Baku, Ferrari had no problem intervening the moment a position needed to move between its own two cars. In Budapest, with a penalty already applied by the stewards, rather than earned by better driving, that same willingness to intervene simply wasn't there. Neither ruling, taken alone, looks unreasonable. A team is allowed to ask a driver to yield in Baku. A team is allowed to let two drivers race clean in Hungary. Put them next to each other, though, and the thing that's supposed to be consistent, the team's own appetite to step in when it decides the outcome, isn't consistent at all. Was Leclerc doing anything wrong by staying ahead in Hungary? No. He drove his own race and finished where his pace put him. Was Hamilton doing anything wrong by being 1/10 of a kilometer per hour over a limit that exists mostly on paper? Also no, not in any meaningful sense. So if neither driver did anything to deserve the outcome, whose decision actually decided it? That's the one that lands on Vasseur's desk, and only his desk. He's not some assistant strategist reading off a script here. This is the man who sat in the same seat back in March, and after watching his two drivers trade positions all through a Shanghai afternoon, was asked directly whether team orders were coming. His answer then was blunt. He would be damned if he were to even consider team orders. That's not paddock spin. That's the team principal, on the record, drawing his own line in the sand before either driver had a real shot at the title. That's the sentence to keep in mind because it comes back. Fast forward to the summer break, and the picture on the timing screen looks completely different from the one Vasseur was describing back in March. Kimi Antonelli leads the championship on 219 points. Hamilton sits second on 169, 50 points back. Russell is third, Leclerc is fourth, 31 points behind his own teammate. This isn't two drivers evenly matched and racing each other for fun anymore. This is one Ferrari driver realistically chasing a world title, and one Ferrari driver mathematically racing for best of the rest. And it's precisely at that moment, the moment the gap between them stopped being close, that Vasseur chose to keep the exact same non-intervention policy he built for a season when both of them were still in the fight. If you're not subscribed yet, this is exactly the kind of story you'll want to be here for the next time it happens, because it will happen again before this season ends. Do the math on what those two positions were actually worth. 4th place in Hungary pays 12 points. 5th pays 10. That's 2 points sitting on the table, and 2 points sounds small until you remember Hamilton is 50 behind with roughly half the season still to run. Championships have been decided by less than that. Add it to the three-place grid penalty Ferrari's own late radio call cost him in qualifying that same weekend, an impeding penalty caused by information that arrived, in Hamilton's own words, right by the time Piastri was already at the apex behind him. And you start to see a pattern that has nothing to do with stewards at all. It's execution, and it's compounding. Here's the honest counter-argument, because it deserves airtime. Vasseur's actual defense isn't crazy. Letting two title-capable drivers race honestly, without a team thumb on the scale, is exactly how you build the kind of internal trust that stops a garage from turning toxic. Ferrari tried the alternative in years past, with drivers who felt like the team had already picked a favorite long before the numbers justified it, and it poisoned the relationship for years. Vasseur watched that happen from the outside. He does not want to repeat it. That's a defensible position. It's also not the one that survives the comparison with Baku. Is Vasseur protecting fairness between two drivers, or is he protecting himself from ever having to be the one who picks? Drop your verdict below and hit like if you already knew the answer before I asked the question, because a lot of you called this exact tension back when we covered the China weekend on this channel. Step back from the two drivers entirely for a second, because this isn't really a story about Hamilton and Leclerc. It's a story about what happens inside a team the moment one driver's title math and the other driver's title math stop being roughly equal. Most teams write their non-interference policy in the off-season, when nobody knows yet who's going to be ahead by summer. The policy is easy to defend when it costs nothing. The real test only arrives once the standings make the cost visible, and that test is exactly the one Ferrari is sitting in right now. Vasseur built a policy for a season where equal treatment was free. He's now running that same policy in a season where equal treatment has a price tag, and the price is being paid entirely by one side of the garage. What comes next is the part nobody at Maranello wanted written down in the same week as a penalty controversy. Before I give it to you, subscribe, because this storyline has a second half, and it plays out over the next several race weekends, not the next several hours. Do I know for certain that Vasseur's decision was about protecting his own position, rather than protecting fairness between his drivers? No, and I'm not going to pretend otherwise. Nothing in what he said proves a hidden motive. It is simply a question anyone watching that Baku exchange, then this one, is entitled to ask out loud. And the honest answer is that the same team principal drew two very different lines within the space of one season, and only one of those lines happened to cost his championship contender actual points. Here's the verdict. A team principal who calls himself damned before he'd ever consider ordering his drivers around is not being tested by whether he can hold that line when it costs nothing. He's being tested by whether he can hold it when it costs his own title. Challenger points he cannot get back. Fred Vasseur held it in Hungary. Whether that's principle or self-preservation is exactly the argument the second half of this season is going to have. In public, every single race weekend, Hamilton stays within reach of the top of that table. Zandvoort is next, and then Monza, Ferrari's home race, with an upgraded engine reportedly on the way for exactly that weekend. If Hamilton starts closing that 50-point gap and Leclerc ends up in his way again, this exact decision comes right back to Vasseur's desk. Except next time, there won't be a summer break to let the story cool off first. So tell me, does Vasseur hold that same line the next time it's Monza and not Budapest? Predict it in the comments, hit like if you think this podium fight isn't finished, and subscribe, because when the next domino falls in this championship, you'll want to already be here for it. Until the next one.